We'll call the meeting to order. This is the January 13th, 2020 meeting of the Addison Central School District Board at tonight at Bridgeport Elementary School. Before we get to introductions, just a piece of news. Victoria Jetty, a fellow board member, is not here today, and that's because her mother-in-law, Gail Jetty, who has been a fixture at Middlebury Union High School over decades, passed away today after a period of long decline. Anybody who knew Gail knew she was a force to be reckoned with. That she ran a sports program that was legendary within the state. And even after her retirement, remained a fixture in the schools, especially as a substitute teacher. So I just wanted to let everybody know that, acknowledge that. If anybody wants to chime in, Chip.
I would just say that both my daughters played for Gail. She was an excellent coach. She was a character for sure. But once you figured out Gail, she knew what she was doing. She was a great model for other coaches and for people pushing it. My daughter, who's a teacher now up at CVU, sort of puts Gail as one of those people that when she came back and coached for her at times as an assistant when she was in college, sort of led her into education. So I think we'll miss Gail. As you said, she'd been declining for a while for sure, but we still have her name on the field, down on the field hockey field, which in those days was by far the best field hockey field in the state. So.
I'm sure she's up there wishing that would become a turf field. All right, well, thank you, Chip, for that recollection. Why don't we go ahead with introductions around the table before we move on to the rest of the agenda, if you wouldn't mind leading us on.
Nick Martin, Amy McGlasher, Jen Newseater, Mary Cullinan,
Betsy Kafumbe, Suzanne Buck,
Lorraine Morse,
Peter Comlin.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Davina Damray,
Chip Malcolm.
Mary Gill.
Thanks, everyone. We're here at Bridgeport. We're going to have a presentation in just a moment from some kids here at the Bridgeport School. But this is the time in our agenda for public comment. Time for, if anybody has a comment they'd like to make to the board, and it's time for us to listen. And I would welcome any volunteers. If you just stand up, give us your name, where you're from, and we'll go from there.
Hi, Chris Kramer from Cornwall, co-chair of Friends of Cornwall School. And I just had two quick comments. One, I saw on the agenda, I'm not sure what the sort of discussion or the direction is of it, but that there's some discussion potentially of the board position on the spending threshold. And this is really just my own personal comment that has nothing to do with any group or anything. But I guess what I would suggest, not knowing exactly where that discussion is going, that in my own view, one of the aspects of the threshold can sometimes be to kind of reframe the discussion in sort of a one-sided way. Are we above the threshold or are we below the threshold? And can sometimes divert discussion away from what's really needed in terms of resources to provide for a quality education. And I guess my suggestion would be, if the board takes a position on the threshold, that I would suggest framing it in a way that allows you to continue to look at things from both sides. I think absolutely there's a fiscal responsibility to taxpayers in the district to carefully consider the resources being spent and collected. But also, I think you never want to put yourself in a situation where you can't weigh that against quality education and what that means. So just very concretely, if you were to take a position, for example, saying we're committing not to go over the threshold, my suggestion would be something like, I just wrote down a suggestion, but it doesn't have to be this, but provided that doing so allows ACSD students to continue receiving a quality education. Some clause that would allow you to at least look at both sides of the equation going forward rather than a complete absolute framework. That's my own personal comment. The other quick comment I just wanted to make is, and I sent the board members a quick email before this meeting. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to come. I'm sure you're all aware that there was an article in the Independent earlier this week about a letter from Middlebury and all of that, and if anyone, I'm happy to chat with folks or board members can describe that more later. But I just wanted to, for anyone who may not have read the email that I sent earlier, just give folks a quick summary of some of the things that have happened since then, which I think actually have been fairly positive. I actually happened to know the authors of the letter and reached out, but also more as a group. So those of us who are part of the Save Our Schools email list and group decided, instead of kind of digging in heels, hey, let's take a breath here. The fact that this came out means something. We could be reactive, but let's just stand back for a second and take a breath. And we decided, hey, what if we reach out to Mary Hogan and to parents there and say, look, we hear you, we hear some of the concerns that are being expressed. That's what's important here. We support the resource needs at Mary Hogan that are there, issues that were brought up in the letter, like class size, special education, behavioral resources, facilities needs, all those things are really important. No matter what town we're in, we're really supportive of addressing those things. And we specifically wanted to reach out to parents and families and residents in Middlebury and invite them to join us in a conversation so we could just kind of express our views openly and have a good, productive conversation. And so we did that on Wednesday at the town offices on the traffic circle in Middlebury at the conference room there. Both chairs of the Middlebury Parents Group, Mesa, were there. One of the authors of the letter, who I actually personally had lunch with after the letter came out, came to the meeting, and a former business manager of ACSD, and a whole bunch of other Mary Hogan parents, and a whole bunch of parents and families and residents from the smaller towns as well. We're all in that room together. I would say there were maybe 25 or 30 people in the room. That's a top of my head estimate. Anyway, we had a very good conversation. It was nicely facilitated. It was all very civil. We didn't all agree on everything. That's fine. And we kind of said from the outset we may not agree on everything, and that's okay. But we were able to have a good, productive conversation. And we even got in a little bit into creative ideas. What are some things that maybe we could agree on, even if we agreed? Let's just say there were 3 things we could agree on and 7 that we know we won't agree on tonight. But it was a good conversation, and I think there seemed to be interest in the room in following up on that and maybe focusing a little bit more on some of that creative brainstorming. So we're exploring that possibility. We certainly would like to reach out to you all to engage, in all of that. I know that, as we all recognize, we were all really grateful for the work that you guys are doing around some of these challenging issues. And recognize that a lot of that, frankly, that's your job. It has to happen at the board level. But to the extent that we can get folks in the community together to agree on some things, even if we don't agree on everything, make your job hopefully a little easier, give you a chance to breathe a sigh of relief, not worry too much necessarily that it's all going to blow up in the papers, that, hey, we could actually get together and have a nice conversation and make some progress. I think that was the hope, and it felt like a good step in that direction.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah. Anybody else? Let me go back here first. Yes.
Ben Bach from Weybridge. It's nice to hear, Chris, they've had those conversations. I know Weybridge, we've had some conversations as well with folks from Mary Hogan that we know on a one-on-one talking level. To try to de-escalate the heated rhetoric that came up. I appreciate that effort. I also wonder if, this is sort of a pitch to maybe Peter Burrows or Brittany Gilman, the tax issue is so complex, how each community funds to the state and how that gets redistributed back with Act 60. If there possibly could be a way, a forum, that we can bring all the towns together and maybe Peter or Brittany provides a presentation of how this all works, so that people don't cherry pick one piece of tax information and use that against each other. So we can all come to the same level platform and figure out how do we move forward for the best of all our ACSD students.
Thanks.
Yes, my name is Millard Fox. I'm from Bregman. And first of all, I'd like to express my sorrow about the passing of Gail Jetty. I was associated with her at the high school for well over 20 years. She was an exceptional coach, obviously, and an exceptional person, and I'm just sad to hear about her death. But the issue I wanted to talk about is Article 8 of the charter that the school board operates under, which is the one that mandates at-large voting. And I understand that the reason that was placed there was to make sure that representational voting would happen. That is, that there would not be an imbalance in terms of the population in the district. Like the towns with a larger population would have a larger say in who gets elected. And I also understand that it was a chance to give the smaller towns some input into the Middlebury representatives on the board. That is, we would be able to vote for the candidates from Middlebury that got elected to the board, and I think that's a good idea. But when it comes to the small towns during the election, if you look at a town like Ripton, which has the smallest number of registered voters in the district, it's not an issue as long as there's only one candidate from a small town. That's the candidate that's going to get elected regardless. But if there's more than one candidate, what are the chances that a town like Ripton would be able to elect the candidate it favors over the other candidate? If you compare the number of registered voters in Ripton compared to the registered voters for the rest of the district, it could be a situation in which Ripton actually does not get to elect its own representative, or any small town for that matter. So for that reason, I don't think it's a constitutional advantage. I think it's actually unconstitutional in that we in Ripton or the voters in Weybridge or Bridport may not be able to elect the candidate that the majority of the people in that town favor. So I would like the lawyers for the board or whoever is going to make the decision about whether that article appears on the ballot or not to understand that perspective. So that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, as I always say when we're visiting a school, which we do at every of our first meetings of the month, it's really one of the great pleasures for this board to come and see not just the facility and meet some of the people, but to hear from the kids in that school. And so, Peter, if you'd like to do introductions as to
Sure.
who we're going to hear from and get us rolling.
I'd love to. So Matthew Bregman, who is in year 1 here as our principal, doing an exceptional job, is going to introduce our students. They've been practicing all day, apparently, and have this fine-tuned.
They've been practicing since Thanksgiving break, and they are a well-oiled machine. So I'm not going to say much. This is 6 of our 8 sixth graders who represent our student council for the school this year. So they meet with me once a week, and they've been working on a number of things. And what they're going to share with you is a project that they worked on from Thanksgiving break to Christmas break, and then if there's time, they would like to teach you the game that they worked on with their classmates.
Borrow some slow democracy.
Sure.
I got my copy too.
Matt?
You got this?
Welcome to our school, and this is the student council. This is Lola. I'm Layla. That's Marilyn, Skylar, Jonathan, and Miranda. Why we chose to math tournament because it is a fun way to learn math facts and bond with 3-4. Also, it was something different and fun that mostly everyone could do and get something great and helpful out of it. Everyone was very excited and looking forward to it.
We noticed that our skill level wasn't at the standard level it should be. Before the tournament, we got a piece of paper with math facts that we needed to fill in. The math facts that we practiced were number 1 through 9, grades 3 to 6, practice the math facts.
We had a tournament and played the tic-tac-toe product game against each other. The top 3 winners got gift cards to Pratt's because the Pratt store supports our school, so we want to support them also. When kids lost the game 2 times, they were out of the tournament. Then they played board games quietly. Everyone got pizza at the end of the tournament.
We gave the multiplication test twice and both grades improved. The tests were 8 minutes each to finish 80 questions. The third and fourth average started at 69% for the multiplication test. 5-6 average started at 76% for the multiplication test. The third and fourth class average ended at 87% and the 5-6 average ended at 83%. The third and fourth improved 18% and the 5-6 improved 7%. The tournament went well, but I think it could have gone better. Some people got mad, but they mostly were fine after.
You want to go back a slide?
Yeah.
You got it. You can look at it.
The 5-6 class started at a higher average. The 3-4 got a higher average at the end. The 5-6 had less to improve at the start, and the 3-4 had just started to do multiplication facts. Both grades can always improve in multiplication. I think the game helped us master multiplication facts.
How to play the tic-tac-toe product game. Each player will put a colored chip on a number at the bottom of the board, wherever you are. Then play rock, paper, scissors to determine who gets to go first. Then put your chip on what number you want. You can only put your chip on one number. Then multiply the 2 numbers together. Then put your chip on the product. Take turns until someone wins.
The goal and strategy. The goal of the game is to have fun in the room. Our strategy is to go in the middle. You are playing defense and offense.
Some rad pictures.
Questions?
I'm confused.
Good.
Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to do the tournament, if you invented the game, and sort of how long a period you did all of this over?
It took a while. It did. Yeah. And Mr. Bregman, that was his idea. And we agreed.
It's amazing that they agreed with what I had to say. The game was introduced to me. It's not a game we made up. It was introduced to me by a colleague in Alaska, and from start to finish was right after Thanksgiving break until the day before Christmas break, the holiday break.
So everybody got a chance to practice their multiplication before entering the tournament?
Yes.
So what we were hoping is for 5 volunteers because it's really hard to learn the game unless you play, and playing the game takes about 5 or 6 minutes. So if 5 of you would like to play, come on over, we can do it here.
All right, would 5 of you please volunteer?
Parents and guests, please come watch.
Are the cameras going to be rolling for this?
Yeah.
See if you do my math facts wrong.
How many board members do you have?
yeah, oh, yeah.
State a pencil. Are you going to be I have to be on the other side. Are you going to play? I'm playing. Then you're going to need a student.
Those guys.
That one of the boys we're going to.
Thinking about factors and products throughout, not just thinking about your four squares, but also playing defense, which is, when we were talking about how to make the slides to explain the game, I'm like, we'll just play. So I want to thank these wonderful people for putting up with me. I've hassled them every Friday pretty much all year, and they rose to the occasion, and I'm super proud of them, so please give them a round.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you to their teachers who put up with my emails on every Sunday saying I need this time, this time, and this time. So thank you, Sarah, and also everyone and everybody else. And now the moment they've been waiting for.
Did they get cookies?
I saw a few cookies.
Our wellness policy doesn't allow.
I've heard that.
Thank you, Matt.
That's half the battle.
All right, folks, sorry about this, but back to business. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from December 18th, 2019?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any changes? Anything anybody want to say about the minutes?
Other than they were awesome.
They were awesome. All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And raise your hand if you're abstaining. Got one, Betty. Okay, thank you. On to the bills.
There are three sets of bills to read. I will make the point that the Finance Division, so to speak, has had to accommodate this new system of accounting, which we didn't have bills to read last week because they had just gotten that and had to input it and adapt to it. So certainly it's a little different format. Victoria and I read them today, and the bills are all there. We just have to figure out how to make it more readable for us. But I congratulate the people downstairs, Melissa and her crew there, to make sure that it all came about okay. It's not easy to have to adapt. I guess we're sort of early in the process.
Yeah, we went live January 1.
Right. So not only are we early in the process now, but we are an early school
Yeah.
in the process of them bringing in over
Since you
time.
brought it up, could you just talk a little bit further about what you're talking about?
Me?
Or either one of you, whichever can explain it better.
Yeah.
So the last year in, near the end of the session, I think, the legislature enacted a new statute that required all school districts in the state to use a single provider for accounting software. At the same time, making some pretty substantial changes to our chart of accounts to satisfy reporting requirements for the federal government. So these requirements, as I understand, have been in place for some time, but the state wasn't able to fulfill their reporting requirements because of the way that they were collecting information from us, the school districts. So the state went out to bid and selected a vendor, which is eFinance Plus by PowerSchool. And it is a vendor that was not being used by anyone in the state currently. Most school districts in the state were using a Tyler Technologies product, which we were, which is Innovisions. So at first, it was thought that it was going to be voluntary. There were some perks, so you get the implementation and the training, and the product itself was free, and they cover 2 years of maintenance, which for us, I think was, we paid around $40,000 a year for support for Tyler Technologies. So the other benefit is that there are supposed to be reduced reporting requirements. So the idea is that the software is centrally housed. It's a web-based product, and there's like a centralized data collection point at the state level. So theoretically, the state should be able to go in and pull information in the way that they want it, rather than asking us to manipulate our data and send it to them in a 1985 Access database. So we were in what's called, it was round 4C, so there were 4 round 4s in this fiscal year. So I would estimate that there's probably 10 districts that went live before us, and there were 3 other districts in my group, Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union and Maple Run, which is St. Albans. And we all went live on January 1, so we processed our first payroll. We're in the process of processing our second payroll. Everybody got paid, that was my main concern. We've also processed a couple batches of accounts payable, so it has been painful in some ways, but I think that I would call it a success. So any transition's painful, but I think my team did really well, and also our extended team, which is the school-based bookkeepers and admin assists, also had to come along for the ride. So everyone's been a really good sport, so I think it's going well. And the principals, yes.
You know, it's important to know that, as school districts have unified and try to become more efficient, they've also been hit with some extra work to become even more efficient and more unified with a statewide e-finance program. But these things have been, it's a lot of work and a lot of time. And, it's essentially learning a whole new sort of system that everybody has to move from, that you were accustomed to Infinite Vision, which took a long time for everybody to get used to a whole new system. And, so if you got payroll out without any hitches, that counters a lot of horror stories that I've heard.
Yeah.
So that's great. Congratulations. Anyway, Chip, back to you.
First group was read by Victoria and I on 12/23. General fund, $287,766.10. Payroll expenses of $855,335.97, for a total of $1,143,102.07. Second set were read by myself and Mary Gill on 12/30. There was $677,033.26 in the general fund, and payroll expenses of $9,827.58, for a total of $686,860.84. And today, under the new system, still have to pay the bills. In the general fund, there was $61,840.58, and 2 payroll-related expenses, one of $872,129.40, and another of $69,757.15, for a total of $3,727.13 total. So I would move that the bills be paid as reported.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you, as always, for your work. Moving along, report of the superintendent, which there's nothing under here on our agenda, but I see Peter has lots of notes on his piece of paper.
So we did give folks a reprieve this month for the written report, just with the winter break and everything else, and the 2-week break at school. So there is no written report. A few things I just wanted to mention that are happening. Obviously, budget has been front and center really for the last month, and we have draft 2 tonight, which I think will help to, I think we're mostly settled out in terms of what it will look like. Don't expect many numbers to change, and we'll be digging into that momentarily. We are continuing, just an update, we are continuing to work on the 6th grade model in terms of what that's going to look like. There's a team at MUMS, a smaller team that began the work and looking at a 6th through 8th grade middle school. They have moved forward. They've shared that with their school leadership team, and it's moving towards sharing it with the whole faculty, and then broadly from there. So that's exciting work. It's kind of reimagining the teaming structure, how that works, looking at how the 6th grade integrates. So that work is moving along well. Brittany mentioned e-finance. I would just reiterate the fact that I think our transition has been really, really strong. I heard Peter kind of alluded to it. I heard horror stories from some other superintendents about the transition, those that made the transition over the summer, and we're having all sorts of issues. I think a lot of that has to do with the work we did on the front end prior to the transition, so that when we got to January 1, we were well positioned. So good job to our whole team. We are continuing the MUHS principal search. That search is ongoing. We are hopeful that we will find our next great leader, and I'll hopefully have more information probably in February would be, I think, when we'll have some more concrete information to share. And there's another thing I've been doing, one final thing. This past month and a half, I've been spending time in schools and meeting with small groups of educators. It's been really helpful to have time beyond just my normal monthly visits. I usually spend about 2 hours a month in schools talking with principals and kind of doing a quick tour of classrooms. It's been really nice this past month to spend longer period of time having real dialogue. It's really helpful to help me to lead and really understand what's happening in our classroom. So that's been fun, and it's also been great to hear about the visits that you all have had in our classrooms, and people have really appreciated those visits, both our administrators, our teachers, our students, our support staff, everybody. So thank you for taking the time.
All right, so the board needs to take action on a few sort of annual bookkeeping or issues. One thing is every year, well, Peter, I'll just let you go ahead and explain it.
So part of Vermont statute is secondary school choice. Each year, this action comes before the board to determine the number of slots that we will open to students from outside of the district to attend MUHS. That number has consistently been 15. Last year, I did a query of our Champlain Valley Superintendent's Group to just double check to see, is our number pretty close per capita to other districts, and 15 was appropriate given where everyone else was. So my recommendation is that we continue to open 15 slots. These are slots that are not reimbursed, so we do not receive any funding for these students.
Could you just, it's not 15, they're not 15 new slots per year necessarily, correct? It is.
Correct.
So once you have
slots.
gotten in, you can stay in.
Yep.
So therefore, the majority of the slots are taken.
Yeah, so
By
each year,
students who are
a number open, of
Yeah.
those 15, a number open.
All right.
Yep. We have a number of students leaving this year, so, Bill, what's the total number?
We presently have 10. We anticipate 5 graduating,
Okay.
scheduled to graduate, so that would be 10 available slots if you were to
Yep.
assume 15 as your capacity.
Do you limit that by grade at all, or is it, you've got, okay, so.
Actually, we're required, if you have more students apply over the capacity, you're mandated to run a lottery, and a blind lottery, and every year we have more applying than we have the capacity for, so we run every year since its inception, we've run a lottery.
How is it then that we have 10 when we usually open up for 15? Was there not as many takers this time around?
Some folks were accepted and decided not to come. Some people have left.
Okay. Yes, Chip?
Can you just, they don't count, as you said, the money doesn't follow them,
Right,
although somebody pays for it, correct?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But they do-
Someone has to pay. I mean, what happens is the district that they're a resident of receives the money. So they're in essence phantom students for that district.
Okay.
They're counted. They're counted. If we have a student who decides to do school choice to Otter Valley, we still collect, we count them in our equalized pupil, and we receive the funding for them. So there are, in this scenario, there are winners and losers in terms of, if you look at where the money flows.
Mary?
Is there any criteria to in accepting students or any gates that they have to get through, or?
No.
So they can come in with special needs, or they can come in any way, okay.
And it's limited to contiguous school districts?
No.
Or it's statewide?
But it's generally contiguous because just if people don't want to
Practicality.
drive an hour or, but, yep.
All right, and the theory, we set 15 because that's sort of thought of as the number that we can accept and have without incurring additional costs. In other words, we can accommodate them. If you have a class of 7 and this makes it 10, you're not hiring another teacher. That's the theory.
That's kind of the idea, yeah.
Yeah. But we have to set this number every year, so could I have a motion to set our school choice capacity at 15 for the 2021 school year?
So moved.
Second.
All right, you've heard the motion. Any further discussion, further questions? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right. And in that vein, we have to set our tuition rate.
So a memo was provided by Brittany in regards to setting the allowable tuition. Normally, by this point, we would have received the allowable tuition rate from the AOE. We have not received that yet, so there's an explanation here of why we've recommended what we are recommending. What often happens is we'll set a rate, and then later on, we're able to bill back districts if the rate that we've set is too low. So this is a requirement to set this. If we don't hit it exactly, we can make up the difference by billing back the districts. Anything to add, Brittany?
If we set it too high, we also have to reimburse the districts. That hasn't happened in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
We were able to bill about $15,000 for FY18, so it all happens in arrears. When we do our reporting at the end of the year, the state runs what we report through yet another complicated formula, and it spits out an allowable tuition number for the prior year. We compare that to what we actually bill, and we can bill basically 7%, but the overage between 3 and 10%. So If we were like wildly off, we wouldn't be able to recoup all the costs, but typically we're within a pretty fair margin, 5% or so.
Yes, Chip?
There's also, and maybe you can explain the qualifications or the numbers which go into the tuition rate. Certain things are exempt from.
Yes,
is that true?
certain fund transfers. So if we make fund transfers to reserve and we have plans for that money, or if we make a fund transfer to reserve and then spend the money, they don't count it twice, right? Because there's a fund transfer and then the spending of the money. So there's certain things that they back out so that we're not double counted on what we spend.
And we don't charge any extra, I guess would be the layman's way of putting it, for like providing a bus for, that is strictly designed for
No,
tuition
so
students.
No, we do, the only place that we provide, we send a bus to the Hancock, Granville, Rochester region that pays for itself, but we don't send busing anywhere else.
Yeah, but that is really just
We can't
exclusively
provide
for.
additional.
Yeah, we can't add on to their tuition saying, hey, we're providing bus service as well.
No, it's all rolled in, it's all baked into the cake.
What would cause you to undercharge, or I guess, we set a tuition rate, then the state comes back and says, well, you could, let's say it's $17,000, and the state might come back and say, well, you could have charged $17,500.
Yeah.
You can go out and bill back for that $500 if it fits all those percentages and criteria.
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
And they're required to pay that.
Yes, as long as we follow the dates and deadlines of notifying them,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
There are some cases where, particularly in supervisory unions, this happens, where there's a high school, a district with a high school, and then a district without a high school. And a lot of students from that other district will go to that high school. They might keep their tuition artificially low, so, they might have an agreement. One example would be Pulte did this because they had wells in Middletown Springs, and a lot of those kids would have gone over the border otherwise to Granville. So they kept their tuition low, and they didn't bill back the difference. But those are sort of
And that's allowed.
unusual cases. That's allowed, yeah.
Well, we historically did that here too.
Yeah.
And especially in Ripton, where, we were receiving 8 or 9 students a year. We did have conversations at the board level about not making that number edge up too high to make us seem much more expensive than other districts, so.
Do we continue to, we set one tuition rate?
We have one tuition rate.
Well, two, one for secondary, one for.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we have a suggested motion to set the FY21 ACSD tuition rate at $16,784 for elementary, K-6, and at $18,095 for secondary students. Would anybody like to put forth that motion?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Suzanne. Second. Any further questions? If not, all those in favor of approving the tuition rates for FY21, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right. Items 3 and 4, we will not adopt the FY21 budget tonight, just to give Brittany and Peter time to, if there's a just-in-case scenario, we've got the time to do it at our next meeting. So maybe we'll swap numbers 3 and 4 here on the agenda, and with the budget update.
Okay.
Mine are also about the budget.
So we're providing an update, jumping off of our last presentation. So we're not going to cover everything we covered last time. We're going to kind of just fill everyone in on, it is kind of like playing a game, right?
I would just like to point out that in board pack, it wasn't a document in the agenda, but it is a document on tonight's meeting list. The budget book is there, and definitely worth a read.
I'm gonna get these out now.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like
Yeah.
an evening picture.
So
what?
Brittany's got the updated information. We also have the budget book in draft form.
Thank you.
And that is online too, so folks, if you want to go online, our budget book for FY21 is in the works. It's not totally done yet, but we are getting there. We thought this picture was kind of apropos. I thought it was kind of cool.
So there's but send it all the way around first. There's some updated documents, and I did bring copies for people in the audience, but send it around to board members. No checks.
So,
It's coming both ways.
so just a quick overview of changes, and then I'm going to hand it off to Brittany. This second draft has some minor revenue and expenditure adjustments, nothing significant except for the Hannaford Career Center increase, which Brittany will talk about in a minute. We've got a slide on that with some information. Our equalized pupils, if you remember, initially we got a number of 60 from the state. We thought that was a little high. We did a couple deep breaths and waited, and it dropped down to 48. It's now dropped down. We think it's settled out now at 47.95. That's in the negative, right?
We've dropped that number of equalized pupils
Right.
1 year to the next.
Yeah. And so down here below where it says summary, that's a 2.67% loss. Our ed spending is, in this current draft, up 4.89%, and with the compounding nature of losing students, our ed spending per equalized pupil is 7.76%. And that with our exemptions, that kicks us above the spending threshold, but with our exemptions, it moves us below the excess spending threshold this year.
Okay. So, yes, as Peter said, I did get some information at the 11th hour. Yep, that caused us to give a paper copy. So the materials that are on board pack and on the website are slightly outdated. We'll post the updated information tomorrow. So everything in the budget book also reflects the old data. So that will also have to be updated. The information that we got at the 11th hour was related to the Career Center. Earlier in the budget season, I spoke to the business manager there and asked for an estimate on what we should anticipate for a tuition increase. And I was told 5%. And on Friday afternoon, I got notification that that increase was actually 23%, which puts their total tuition at a little over, $25,593 per FTE, and we have 47 FTE. So that generated an increase in our budget of about $114,000, and that resulted in about a half a cent tax increase. So it was unexpected. It's a pretty big increase. So we felt that we did need to update the budget to reflect that. I don't know if there are questions about that before.
23%.
Yeah.
I guess I would welcome any insight of that from our members of the Hannaford Career Center Board, if any insight can be provided at this point.
What I can tell you is the Career Center budgets are based on a rolling 6-semester average. So figure you have 2 semesters a year, so you're looking at 3 years back. We had a large group of students for 1 semester they fell off. We had several semesters of lower students. This year we have, I think it's 60 more students, so that we'll have a big semester this year. But the career centers, the way that the state has mandated that our budgets be set is over a 6-semester average to try to level out the ups and downs of students coming and or going to the Career Center. The only major hit in the Career Center budget was the cost of health insurance for the teachers. That was a big increase, and I think that was really and the only other thing that I can think of right now off the top of my head, because I wasn't really expecting to speak to this, was the fact that The auditors, when they audited the books, they recommended that the budget start putting money into, like we've done, into like a little savings account for the rainy day fund. The Career Center had been operating on a shoestring budget, you might say. We had a cushion of $10,000. That was all that was built into the budget. So if anything major went, $10,000 doesn't really cover a lot of major things. So there's a little money built in just for fudge factor, but the biggest piece is the 6-semester rolling average and the fact that we had, it was well over $100,000 we had added for health insurance. I don't remember the exact figure, but.
I don't see the, I'm just curious, budget to budget, what's the proposed increase?
Like I said, I wasn't.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's just over 11% budget to budget.
Year to
I think
year.
it's 11.75 was the budget to budget increase.
Well, that's fairly significant as well.
I believe it, my understanding is that, and I don't have the full specifics yet because I haven't been able to meet with Dana yet, but my understanding is there maybe are 2 added positions in there, not woodworking or
The building and
construction,
trades
building
position
trades.
had been paid, I think, the first year out of Perkins funding.
But not
and
this coming year.
Not this coming year.
Yeah.
And,
there might be a dean of students or.
well, there has been like an assistant director position this past year. That individual was part-time instructor, part-time assistant director, and so they have, through numerous pieces, they've decided that they can't do with a part-time person. So that's all that I really know.
Yeah.
Nothing's been sent out to,
Right.
you know.
Chip, did you have a question?
Yeah, the question really is more of just an observation that when we just talked about tuition, and we just talked about what, an $18,000 tuition, and this is substantially more. I understand the explanation, but it is, as a public member, I would say, wow, that's, even though it's done over a rolling average and things like that, which most of the time rolling averages are meant to ameliorate radical changes each year, but seems like a lot. Obviously, we have probably, twice as many kids in the Voc Center as Career Center as the other 2 sending
We're about
schools?
40% of the enrollment
40%, okay.
at the Career Center.
So it affects them too, obviously, not even for gents, but you're going to have to explain this. I mean, we don't have any, it's not our budget, so it's not our, we have this relationship, we got to put it in the budget, but it's still, it's a huge difference.
And I would like to add that the Career Center will be meeting on Wednesday night to finalize their budget. So these numbers have not been passed through the board. The board itself just received the finalized draft over the weekend, so that no one has voted on this yet, so that the board could vote to do something different, but that is what there is currently. So
Yeah.
What's the check and balance between, like, they just pass on the number to the districts and whatever it is, it is?
Well, there is a similar check and balance in terms of allowable tuition. So the Career Centers also have to submit the same reporting that we do, and the state will tell them what's allowable, but it's based on expenditures. So if your expenditures are high, then your allowable tuition is high. So the check on that would be that the whole county, I believe, votes on the Career Center budget.
That's the check is it goes in front of voters, and voters as a separate warning, and voters approve that or don't approve that.
But it's been, traditionally, it's been since it used to be housed within the high school budget.
Right.
But then it became an independent career center, one of, I think, 3 in the state. And one of the challenges is that I think it probably gets less attention by the public than the schools that people are more directly connected with, because you're sort of a student of your high school first and a student of the career center second.
Right. And where are we from a Career Center perspective with regards to our per pupil costs? Where do we rank?
Highest in the state.
Pardon me?
Career Center.
Highest in the state?
Yeah.
Yes, Mary?
At this tuition rate, is it going to impact the number of students we can send on to the Career Center?
We don't actually get to decide. We have to pay for the number of students that,
Make the request?
yeah, if they're admitted to the Career Center. There's no cap for us.
So the sending school can't say, we've reached the cap on the amount of
It's too
tuition?
expensive, or...
Right.
No.
Okay.
Jen?
2 questions. Did they have a spending threshold like we do?
No, because they don't have, there's no tax rate assigned to them.
So what is the vote that we do? So I know as a taxpayer, we have, then you vote on the school budget, then you vote on the Hannaford career.
You vote separately, yeah. The whole county, right?
Right. And
Well, it's
so,
the 3 school districts.
Schools.
So that leaves
Right.
out a few towns.
Right.
so are we voting on a budget that comes out of our taxes, or are we voting for basically our school district to pay this money here? Do we know how that works?
Well, both.
Kind of
So,
both.
yeah, so when we approve when the voters vote on the ACSD budget, they vote on the portion that we're going to pay. But then also the 3 Addison, the Addison Northwest, Mount 8th, and Addison Central, the towns vote on the Hannaford budget as a whole separately. Is that?
But are we paying double? Are we paying, or twice?
No.
Are we paying
No.
once to
No.
Hannaford and once through this? The only time that we're paying is through this, but
Right.
we're agreeing to their budget or not agreeing to their budget when we make our vote.
Right.
So they don't have a separate tax,
Right.
Right.
that'd be ways, yeah.
And then additionally for
We carry it,
tuition.
essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. And then in terms of equalized pupil, and we'll talk a little bit about equalized pupil, I think, did we keep those slides or did we get rid of
I think we
those?
got rid of it.
Okay. But in terms of equalized pupils at MUHS, if a student goes to the Career Center, that 6-semester average, we don't count, the portion of that student that's at the Career Center doesn't count for us on our equalized pupil number. So we can't both, the high school and the Career Center can't double count a student. That would be like getting double funds when you're not teaching the student. So we are, when a student attends the Career Center, we're not counting them in our equalized pupil and vice versa.
But we are essentially paying for them to be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're paying a lot more than we pay for the regular children to be there, and we can't count them. There is an inequity in this, financially, okay? Not necessarily, not equating to the educational part, but it is an inequity. And that's part of what I was sort of saying, that that's a big difference if somebody's looking at that. I, as a taxpayer, not as a board member, go, wow, why is that? That's a lot.
Well, I think.
So anyway, I guess that, when you discuss it at your board meeting.
So before we leave this topic, I realize this is sort of new for all of us, including our board members who are on that board. I think if I were to sort of kind of sum up the feeling in the room, we would consider this a significant concern that we would like to bring to the attention of the Hannaford Career Center Board, and that, this is, it's $100,000 in our budget that either isn't going to taxpayers or isn't being used for resources, and that 23% increase is challenging.
And the vote, just one quick, the votes are happening on this,
Town meeting day.
Same day.
how does that work? So you're voting on, this is going to get yay or nay,
Right.
and we're also then going to have a budget that's going to be yay or nay, that's
Right.
going to be impacted by that number that we're not going to know because it hasn't been voted on.
Right, yeah, so if something were to happen in the budget for the Career Center were to be defeated and it were to be decreased, then we would have surplus.
Right.
We have a lot of those things in this business.
Yeah,
It's like a game, remember?
It is, yes. Yeah, it would create a surplus potentially for us if all of a sudden that number went down and
Yeah.
and ours was passed, and there's, they decreased theirs and was ultimately approved.
And if we get other information between now and next Monday when we sign the warning,
Right.
I'll certainly update it, but right now, this is what we have.
It's next Tuesday, right?
Next Tuesday, sorry. Okay, so you'll see on the budget summary that I handed out, the only real differences, aside from some minor adjustments in revenue, was that tech center line. And I also adjusted the contingency. It seems like forever ago when we talked about this, but we talked about the contingency last time was shown a bit higher because that's where I was keeping some of those costs related to the result of statewide negotiations. And as discussed, I did parse that out into the functional areas. So you'll see that when you see the increases, just slight differences there. Other than that, no changes to FTE, no staffing changes or anything like that since the last time that we talked.
Brittany, could you talk a little bit before you get into the funding system?
Sure.
Healthcare, the 13% increase equals
Yes.
how much money?
Over $600,000.
Okay, and that represents what percent?
Around 2% of our budget.
Of this, whatever 6% that we're at, it's 2 points of that?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, of our total budget.
Yeah.
600,000 is about 2% of our total budget.
How much of what percent of the increase is just healthcare?
Our increase is about 1.2 million, I think, so it's about half.
Wow.
That's a gross number. There are
Yep.
associated revenues, but yeah. Ready?
Yeah.
All right, so I just wanted to do a little bit of a review about our ed funding system to just kind of remind everybody and ground everybody in sort of our current reality for better or for worse. So it's a statewide funding system. Prior to 1997, that was not the case. There was a court case, Bregman versus State of Vermont, and there were wide disparities in tax burdens due to varying real estate values across the state. So Act 60 was developed and enacted, and basically says the state of Vermont now funds all public school districts, budgets approved by the voters. So all the money sort of gets collected and sent to a central place and then gets redistributed. And it was an attempt to equalize spending and demographics and student population, and Act 68 brought about the modified funding formula, which we've come to know and love. The ed fund is about 1.6 billion. It's much larger than the general fund for the state. Now we're talking about the state ed fund. So property taxes fund 67% of that, or thereabouts. 26% homestead property tax, and the other 41 is non-homestead property tax. That's non-residential, so businesses, second homes. Other sources are sales and use tax, 33% of the vehicle purchase and use, all the lottery revenues, and 25% of meals, rooms, and alcohol goes to the ed fund. So here's our tax rate calculation. Now that you know all the glorious history, our expenditures are up 3.74%, very similar to what we presented last time. Once you subtract our local revenues, which are tuition revenues and any local grants, things like that, we get our education spending, which is 4.89% increase over last year. Equalized pupils, which, as we've talked about in the past, is sort of a two-year average, two-year weighted average of attendance, is down 2.67%, and that compounds our education spending and leads us to an ed spending per equalized pupil of 7.76%. That's a much bigger driver of our tax rate than our expenditures. In fact, our expenditure budget has really very little bearing on what our ultimate tax rate will be. The ed spending per equalized pupil, though, plays a big part. The next number to look at is the property yield. This is recommended by the tax commissioner on December 1st, and it's voted on by the legislature later in the legislative session in the spring. And that's part of the mechanism that makes it a statewide funding system. So figure out how much money we need to raise statewide, and this number goes up and down based on that. Usually when the property yield increases, we're happy because that leads to an ultimate tax rate decrease. In this case, it didn't increase enough to offset our tax rate increase. So if you divide your ed spending per equalized pupil by your property yield, you get an equalized tax rate. All the towns in the district have the same equalized tax rate. It's $1.73 this year, or next year projected, or 5.44% increase. We're on our third out of 5 years of incentive rates. So as a reward for voluntarily unifying, we were given a tax rate incentive. It started out as 10 cents in the first year, and it goes down 2 cents each year until it goes away. So next year is our 4th year, and then the year after that will be our last year. So we have to combat that natural 2-cent decrease in the incentive rate, and that leads to the ACSD revised tax rate of $1.69, and that's a 6.9% increase. Any questions so far? The next piece of the puzzle is the common level of appraisal, and that is a valuation comparison of fair market value of real estate in each town. So every town has a different CLA, and changes in CLA can pretty dramatically affect your tax rate. So when your CLA is below 100, it makes your tax rate, the town tax rate, higher than the district tax rate. If your CLA is above 100 in your town, it makes your tax rate lower than the district tax rate. So you can see the changes here. Almost all of our towns except Middlebury are declining in CLA, and the towns that are seeing the largest declines, Bridport and Salisbury, will see the largest tax rate increases. Middlebury is going up just slightly. There was a reappraisal last year. So at this time last year, we actually didn't know what Middlebury's CLA was, but it came in at 102.95, and it's slightly up this year. So remember this slide when we get to the next slide.
And one thing I'll add about that, we're going to look at some graphs in a minute in looking at where kind of tax rate was and now is for all of our towns. And when a town is reappraised, it's then really hard to compare what it was paying before to what it's paying now, because the house valuations have changed. So your house that was 300 is now 375, but you're paying a lower tax rate, but you're paying on more house. So that's just a complicating factor in Middlebury to keep in mind as you're looking at these graphs.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody, CLA doesn't have anything to do with us.
No, so that's the listers in each of your towns will take part in that.
Oh, it's the legislature.
Well, doesn't have anything to do with you.
Everything has a So it's called an adjusted tax rate when you get down to the town level, is ranging from 10 to 18 cents in each town. So you can see here the change in FY20 to FY21, and a lot of this is the function of the CLA. So Middlebury's coming in at almost 10.5 cents, and Salisbury is the high end at just over 18 cents. And we'll talk about what that means for the average taxpayer.
So, Brittany?
Yes.
So, Peter C. had said, I think when we were in Shoreham, that all of the bonds that are out, that it's not just those communities that voted for the bond, it's the entire state that pays for the bond?
Well, yes.
A tiny portion of it.
Yeah, so because we're a statewide funding system, everything goes into the same pot, and it's basically the yield that creates that function. So depending on what budgets actually pass, then the legislature will look at how much money we actually need to raise versus how much money they thought we were going to need to raise on December 1st when they put out the estimates. And they get those estimates from us. They ask business managers, what do you think? And then they work with the director of finance at the AOE, and they look at equalized pupils and factor in what they think the revenues are going to be. And they make an estimate on what they think the yield should be set at, and it always changes. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. It depends on the statewide budget as a whole, if there's surplus that they want to use to buy down the tax rate, what people actually pass for budgets. So there are some schools that are looking at some really, really big bonds, $200 million bonds, and obviously if those pass, then that's more money that needs to be raised by that school district, which means more money needs to be raised by the state, which means the yield will probably go down, which means the taxes will probably go up. But how much, I can't predict.
And that's why there's, after town meeting day, the yield rate is continued to be tinkered with as the state realizes we have to raise this much money. That yield rate, which we set December 1, is no longer relevant because we overestimated X amount.
The way to think about the yield, and this is very simplistic and not 100% accurate, but the ed fund consists of, as Brittany showed, sales tax, rooms and meals tax, lottery, some of the, some other stuff, and then non-residential property tax. Those are all kind of fixed numbers that we don't really control. And so then you've got, how much more do we got to raise? And that's the homestead. And that's sort of what the yield takes into account, is how much on the homestead do we have to raise? So it's, it's a number that can change. One thing that also can affect it is, if it's a great year for the sales tax.
Right. Other revenues can affect that. So yes, it's definitely important to note that these tax rates are estimates. They can and probably will change, usually slightly in either direction. Oh, okay, I showed that. So this just shows, this is our historical pre-CLA tax rates by town. So in FY16 and 17, all the towns had different tax rates because that was pre-unification. And then in FY18, we all came together. And there was a pretty good tax rate decrease, 18 to 19, stayed pretty level through that time. So looking back, in FY16 at the tax rates, most towns are still seeing a lower pre-CLA tax rate. So we are seeing the benefits and the efficiencies of unification here. This is what CLA can do. So it gets a little crazier when you start to look at CLA. And I know this is really hard to look at, and I don't expect you to really be able to glean something meaningful from it beyond the fact that CLA has a substantial impact on the tax rate of a town. And you can see how different our tax rates are, even as a unified district with a single budget and a single district tax rate. CLA kind of puts us all over the place. These tables are in the budget book, which is in draft form, but it's on the ACSD website. You can find it under the Business Office tab. It's called ACSD FY21 Annual Report and Budget Book. It's labeled stamped draft, draft, draft everywhere, and we'll update it as the board, finalizes the budget. But it contains a lot of information like this. There's an introduction piece, a financial section, and then there's a pretty meaty historical section at the back where we look at, the history of our budgets and some of our ratios and our enrollment, and a lot of really good information. So I'd encourage you to look at that. We've talked about the excess spending threshold. So it generally increases by the NEAP each year, which is the New England Economic Projection. It's generally 2 to 2.5% increase each year. You can see that's a problem when budgets are going up 3, 4, 5% each year. And that's kind of what you're seeing statewide. I've talked to a lot of other business managers around the state, and they're feeling similar pressures. Even in districts that historically haven't seen declines in equalized pupils are seeing declines in enrollments. So as we get closer to town meeting day, I suspect that you're going to see more press about district budgets and the effect that years of restrained spending and declining enrollment and the toll that that's taken. And now sort of the top's kind of getting blown off, and we're seeing growth in budgets in really unprecedented ways. And people are creeping up on this number. So this year, or for FY21, we are over the excess spending threshold, but we have enough exemptions. We're over by about $100, but we have $229 per pupil in exemptions. So we'll be below the threshold with exemptions, and we won't have additional tax consequences as a result.
Are exemptions things like bond payments and
Bond payments,
busing?
teacher retirement, some certain special ed expenses. And it just kind of shows you that the threshold is sort of increasing at a real steady, comfortable rate each year, but budgets aren't. So we finally reached the point where it's intersected. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the property tax means, because we throw around a lot of numbers and people will say, well, what does it mean for me? So before I start talking about this, I want to say that every individual is different, every tax rate is different, there's a lot of factors. So please, if you have a house that's valued $300,000, don't take this to the bank because you may not pay based on your property tax. There's many different scenarios. Some people pay based off income, some people pay based on a combination. But this is a general look at what the tax rate would mean. So for a tax increase on a taxpayer paying solely based off a home value, no income sensitivity, if your house value is $300,000, District-wide, we're looking at increases of $416 to just $544.
Middlebury is 313.
Yes. Oh, you're right. Sorry, 313 Middlebury.
Give everybody a moment to get their jaws up off the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the increase this year.
Yeah. So from 20 to 21, based on the increase that we're seeing right now, a Bridport resident would see about a $500 increase if they had this situation, right? This exact situation.
Ask you a question.
Sure.
From a legislative perspective, what's the sense that you have of the opinion of the legislature if we get to a point where a specific percentage of school districts are above the threshold? That's no longer a threshold. Like,
You know, the threshold's an interesting topic every year. You know, it's hard, if you ask me personally, it's hard to justify a NEEP increase of 2% when health insurance is going up 13%. I mean, a school is not a basket of goods bought in New England. So to me, the number's already painful. You know, currently statewide, it generates about $500,000. There's really not many people who are over it, and if they're over it, they're only over it by a little bit. And I think its purpose is not to raise a lot of money, but it's really there as a signal more than anything else to try to enforce a little bit of fiscal discipline in an era of continually rising school costs with declining enrollment. So I think as a sort of signal, it's favored. But your point is well taken, let me put it that way.
I think you'll see more pressure on that as districts, you know, it hasn't been a problem in the past. Number one, because prior to, tell me if I'm wrong, Peter, FY16, it was a different calculation.
Yeah.
So there were different things in play before FY16. And up until this year, as Peter said, it hasn't been a problem for a lot of people. But as I said, things are starting to catch up with us. The healthcare premium increases, the loss in enrollment, the deferred maintenance, and this is statewide. So we're seeing a lot of pressure on budgets, I think more than in prior years.
In my conversations with folks in Montpelier, when I brought this, and I'm on the trustees for the Vermont Superintendent Association, and talked with legislators in Montpelier, and it doesn't sound like there's a lot of, at least in this session, that there's a lot of desire to address the spending threshold or even talk about it at all. So it sounds to me like it's going to be a year or 2 years out, potentially, that it starts to become a topic. But, you know, the challenge of this is anybody who gets up to the threshold, if your intention is to stay below the threshold, anybody who's there is every year cutting. You're cutting forever because there's no real way with salary increases and healthcare increases. You're always going to be looking, unless employees decide, yeah, we'll take a pay freeze for a number of years, which is unlikely. You're looking at a 3.5 roll up every year. And so, you know, and like Peter said, we've been living with the NEEP only for 4 years, 4 years, I guess. Before that, it was average spending. And it was a percentage multiplied times average spending. So that was a vehicle to kind of keep it moving. And what they did prior to messing with the threshold was they changed the percentage that the average spending multiplied by to try to suppress spending. So.
Also wanted to talk about what this means for somebody who's paying based on income sensitivity. So this example is based on a couple that has an $80,000 combined income, and you'll see that it's the same for all towns because income sensitivity doesn't take into account the CLA. So essentially, they're paying based on a certain percentage of their income. And 68% of Vermonters statewide pay based on income, 71.2% in Addison County. And for the 2018 tax year, you can see for our towns that most people received a property tax adjustment of some kind.
another math question. So
This is from Tic-Tac-Toe, or?
well, I'm gonna get Lola back who kicked my butt. She should probably do a better job of understanding all this. The percentage of folks from a homestead versus a non-homestead rate.
Yeah.
And the percentage of folks who are based on income rather than property.
Yes.
As that percentage is based on income is, let's say, going up
Yes.
for other economic reasons, that means there's less contribution to the overall need number.
Yes.
Correct? So then is that additional burden then placed on a higher rate for the property tax? Is that how they're thinking about it?
Yes.
Just stick with it.
The last calculation that I saw that was put out by the Department of Taxes was that for people that pay based on their property tax, it's about 40 cents on their tax rate as a result of the income sensitivity.
Which is why it's a tough place to live.
Other questions?
Tough tax-wise.
Stunned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, gee, thanks, Brittany.
Brittany, you explain it well, even though
Yes.
it's really
Yeah.
complicated.
That was really-
But, you know, it's sort of the same, we've heard this, not from you necessarily, but we've heard this sort of scenario, which is always depressing. And for me as a board member, I'm always trying to figure out how that gets translated into, you know, why, if we're going up 3-point-something% in our spending, why am I spending 10 cents, you know, or 15 cents or whatever on the
Right,
tax rate?
right.
Well, this is the way it is, even though it's made up of all these other things. It's almost impossible
Yeah.
to try to explain it, I think, other than in this really general, sort of depressing way.
Well, and I think there's so many factors that remove any control that we have over the things that we're debating, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, we're
Absolutely.
you know, there's obviously sensitivity and appropriate concern to the impacts that we're making on what it costs to educate a kid here, but that is like this compared to the other issues of how we fund in general that are finally impacting, from a financial perspective, things like our property taxes or rates.
Yeah.
It gets yin and yang.
Yeah. It feels very far removed.
Far removed.
Well, I went to the, some of you went too, to the program, state. No, not our Wolf, but the program last week relative to the healthcare changes. And, you know, I mean, there were some obvious major changes in that, which affects us even more than just the premium increases, which are set by the insurance companies and the state coming together to figure out what the rate's going to be. Totally out of our control. It isn't out of our control as to, you know, how many employees we have or something like that, but of the employees we have, we're going to have to pay much more for their health insurance, some of them, okay, because they're now allowed to get certain things. That's not in our control. Whether we can agree with it or not agree with it, but we don't control that at all. And I thought that was a very, I mean, the presentation, I think, needs to be sharpened up a little bit, but on the other side, I felt it was helpful for some of us to understand that.
Brittany, going back to the Hannaford part, if I can quickly, you mentioned, I mean, I jotted down 1/2 cent increase. So I'm trying to figure out in my mind how that fits into the equation of that, like $300, $400, $500. Is there a way you can kind of?
I'm not sure I fully understand what you're asking.
Well, the I think you're talking about the $114,000 increase
Yeah.
in tuition over basically what we had budgeted in our
Yeah,
previous
right.
draft.
Yep.
Translates, you said, to a 0.5%?
About half a cent on the tax rate.
0.5% on the tax rate.
All right, so-
You know, like $300,000 is, you know, about a penny and a half or thereabouts. So when I looked at what our tax rate was before adding that, and then I added it, it was about 0.5 cent thereabouts. That $100,000 change. I'm not sure if I'm being clear. I feel like we're talking around each other. I want to understand.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out like how much that 0.5 cent.
Well, a cent on the tax rate for a $300,000 home is $30. Am I doing math right?
Yep.
Am I mathing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's $30, so $15 for a $300,000 home.
But that's just from what we were
Just the addition.
estimating
Right.
Yeah.
a week ago compared to what we were just told on Friday.
Right. That's not the total
Right.
cost of the. Taking over?
No, I was just going to
Passing
close
the
out
baton.
the... Take over.
All right.
Other questions? Should we take a few deep breaths? Breathe in. I think we're good.
All right. Yes,
Take
Jim.
a few deep breaths, but we know we're doing a good job, all right? And I think even though all these things are beyond our ability to control, our cost controls are still as good as we can have without cutting things which you think may be essential. So, I mean, it's depressing because we're sitting here as board members and as people that own a home, we're going to have to see our taxes go up a lot, but
And I was talking with a few people about just Vermont in general, and I think, you know, the idea that we're doing a good job is really important. My niece and nephew grew up in Portland, Oregon, and there was no band without the parents paying for it. There was no art without the parents paying for it. Vermont, we've chosen a different path, albeit a very expensive path, and that certainly has some value to it as well.
Particularly when you're talking about equity.
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, you know, we put on the discussion of a position on the excess spending threshold. Normally, at the beginning of the budgeting process, we would have had this conversation as a board to say, as a guideline, it's not a hard and fast rule. To speak to Chris Kramer's concern, it's just sort of a statement. It doesn't lock us into anything, but we have generally provided a guideline to the administration to say we would like to see a budget that comes in under the excess spending threshold. Given the fact that these numbers can change from week to week, given the fact that we're right up against it, and that we are going to revisit this in a week, perhaps we should, again, sort of take a position on that. I don't know if people want to discuss further, but typically we've taken a vote and said we would like to see a budget that keeps us under the excess spending threshold. And we've never faced a situation where the administration has come back and said we can do it, but it's going to be really painful. We've been able to stay under. Yes, Chip.
The excess, our choices on the excess spending threshold, or the excess, or whatever, not the excess spending, on the money that we have, is to either move it all into something else.
Are you talking about our fund balance?
Our fund balance, I mean, which is what we have as a way to manipulate it if we wanted to. We've had this discussion in other years on this board. One year, we were split it down the middle because we couldn't come to a reasonable solution, pass some of it to the budget and some of it to other things. This, I think, we're at a point where it would be much more important, I think, for us to say we don't want to budget over this number and we're not going to use this balance that we have to adjust the tax rate. So I think that's a trap. No matter how little it is, I just don't think, this is money that's been allocated by the taxpayer for us to run the schools. And to send it back, I think you're just running, because what do you do the next year when suddenly you don't have that number to move it, your increase is going to be even worse.
So yes, Suzanne?
So, I mean, if you think of it this way, if we were to take some money out of reserve and put it towards the budget, then next year we start in a negative balance. So then we have to figure a way to climb out of that hole.
Right.
Just to get to the equal point. And it's so hard to do. I mean, I can't run my household that way. And it makes even more pressure, I think, on the administration if they already know that they're starting with a negative balance. I mean, how do you figure out what's best when you're in a negative balance? I don't know. I mean...
So what I'm hearing is sort of two positions saying not only stay under the excess spending threshold, but don't use reserves to do that, to accomplish that. Maureen?
I agree completely. Even when we were talking at the last meeting of that $1,000 to take out of the reserve, I would have voted against that because I don't think we should be.
I would say find something else in the budget to bring it down.
You mean when we were potentially over by
Right.
$100,000?
Yes.
Anybody?
My only concern is if, I don't know how much faith I have in this system that's establishing the threshold number, if it's following an index that from a healthcare cost perspective is going to outweigh it every year. And so I just don't want to put them I don't want to put the district in a position where reality is going to force you to go above the threshold we are to the point where it could be a significant cut because all these other things that are out of our control are escalating at a greater than the rate at which the threshold is being established. And so now I just don't want to handicap them by saying, yeah, because you're over this number that I'm not quite sure is the best number anyway, go figure it out.
Jen?
Are we discussing this for just this year's budget or moving
No, just
forward,
this year's
trying
budget.
to-
Just this year's
Okay.
budget.
So we're just basically telling ourselves this year, we do or do not feel comfortable going up the threshold. We're not like making a policy saying this board
No.
shall
No.
henceforth.
Thank you
never.
for clarifying. Yeah.
But
And
the argument though is that we do hear language saying, well, we usually don't go over it, so
Right.
let's not.
it becomes a practice, not a
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah.
I can probably give some historical
Yeah, go right ahead.
insight here. So when we were individual boards, you know, we had this conversation in a couple of our towns that were at the threshold. You know, and you can see the impact of the threshold in boards across the state. I mean, the work happening in Edison Northwest recently is all related to the spending threshold, and all the different machinations they've made in terms of trying to bring their budget down has been to get below that number. So that number is, I think, in a lot of ways sacrosanct for many boards throughout the state. In conversations here previously, historically, you know, Weybridge was spent over the threshold, I think, 2 or 3 years, and you know, had thoughtful conversations around it and said, you know, we're going to spend more. We're not concerned with the, you know, the double taxation above the spending threshold. So every dollar above that is doubled. Ripton, on the other hand, made a number of cuts to stay below the threshold. The conversations at the board level were really around, we don't want to put something out to taxpayers that is going to make them feel, and there's an emotional component to this too, I feel like I'm getting double taxed. So that was something they didn't feel the community would support, so they made some changes and reduced positions and did other things to stay below the threshold. So I think we're not necessarily facing it this year because we skirted in below, but it's a complicated conversation, and we are representing everybody. So figuring out kind of like as a community, we're a pretty diverse community, I think, as well. So I think, you know, I think it looks to me like this year we're looking pretty good, but it's a conversation I think that will continue into the future, and I agree with what Mary was saying, that the formula and the numbers don't match. So there's a statewide problem here that we also have to address that I feel like we need to kind of galvanize on.
Yeah, so as a board, is that what we can start thinking about once our desk settles a little in this immediate process, is to make recommendations to the state? Is that sort of the position we take?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep everybody updated as to where it goes. You know, I certainly think about it and talk about it all the time, especially, you know, the healthcare thing is what I think was triggering a lot of people to say, you know, this threshold is largely symbolic. Those who, and there are districts who are over the threshold, the total amount of money that we're talking about is not much. You know, if you're over by $3 or $4. But you had to be a high spending district to get there. You know, it's all about getting there as opposed to the $20 extra it might cost a $300,000 house in double taxation. So there, you know, and I appreciate it. I think the counter argument is we continue to be a state with declining enrollment and increasing costs, and even with the excess spending threshold, that fiscal discipline that it was supposed to create hasn't really happened. For whatever factors there might be, it's just we live in a place that's expensive to school kids. But I think that there's going to be a lot more talk. I'm certainly talking because that 2% increase in the threshold just doesn't match reality anymore.
Right. Well, if I can have one more second on the floor, even the lowest level spending districts are going to approach it eventually, right? If you're increasing health insurance at 13%,
everyone will be over eventually,
right? Like everybody's going to get there eventually, so it just doesn't make sense moving forward in the long term.
Right. But as you say, we've got this year to talk about. And so I guess I would read, you know, we've got sort of this 1 week window where something might happen with the budget. And I guess, you know, shall we signal to the administration that we would still like to adjust the budget to keep it under the excess spending threshold? We can change we're a legislative body, we can change our mind and go in a different direction if we want to, but it's, you know, it's the message we want to say. Just from a more historical perspective, the UD3 board, which is, you know, was a 13-member board representing all the students in the district from grade 7 to 12, it was that board's practice always to say, bring a budget in under the excess spending threshold, just because of recognizing what the impact of it was and sort of what it signaled to people, because that you would be saying, we are spending at a level where we're going to double tax. And we didn't feel that was being seen as governing responsibly.
I'd certainly support that. Me too.
People comfortable with that? Thank that. Good, you know, good discussion. I got to say, this is. We're living through some interesting times of money. It's not just going to be schools. It's going to, you know, the demographics of our state are going to touch everything as we continue to go forward. All right, well, we are at the section of other in our agenda. We have not met since the petition for 2 article changes in the charter was given to the district clerk to verify signatures. So I thought we'd just take a moment to kind of update the process there. I guess, Peter, if you could just talk for a moment what we've done with that.
Yeah. So we received the petitions after we last met. We have been working with legal counsel to determine how to move forward with these 2 petitions. One petition is to change the charter to allow towns to vote to close their schools instead of allowing the board to have that power. The second petition is to allow towns to vote for their representatives solely, as opposed to maintaining at-large voting. And those of you that were here at the establishment of the charter know that that second article, the second petition I mentioned, that the work that we did to form the board, there was a lot of legal review and working with the AOE and working with Secretary of State's office to determine how to create a constitutionally sound board, this board that is here today, looking at representation when the numbers, in terms of the number of residents in each town vary so greatly. And it was determined at that time, and Suzanne can probably speak to this as well as I can, she was one of the co-leads on that. It was determined that the district, if it wanted to maintain these numbers, would have to go to at-large voting to remain constitutional. So we sent these petitions forward. We are supposed to be getting a formal kind of summary of, a legal summary, letting us know what direction we should take with that second article in terms of warning it or being able to warn it or not. I did have a preliminary conversation with the attorney, and he based on his research, he said it's looking like that he would not recommend to warn the second article due to the constitutional issue with it. But I am awaiting the formal response from him this week, so it is going to be on our agenda for the 21st to discuss and determine how to move forward with that. Jen?
So I'm super confused about why we as a school district warn a petition that wasn't created or developed by the school board.
Because
instead of like the towns.
It's in a way sort of not so different than if you're a nonprofit and you want an appropriation at town meeting, and they say,
Right.
well, you need to go out and get signatures
Right.
to put that on the ballot.
Yep.
Once that comes in, if it's sort of constitutionally sound, you're sort of obligated.
The town is.
Yeah.
I
And in this
assume
case, we are the municipality.
Yeah.
Because we are.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, I had yes, Chip.
And what is our role in support or not supporting a petition that we are petitioned to put on the ballot?
Right. So, in terms of actually putting it on the ballot, if it's constitutionally sound, I would say we don't really have a choice. However, if we would like to take a position on it, a public position, that's certainly within our right, and that will be on our agenda for next week as well.
Okay.
So, give that some thought.
Because it used to be the case, as I remember from years past, where we would set a budget and yet we couldn't support it. In other words, you couldn't say, vote for the budget.
So I think that by presenting it, you have said you support it. What you can't do is spend taxpayer dollars to promote that position.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a technical question that maybe in the articles, I didn't read it, and that is that to create the articles of agreement, it required a vote in every town. To change the articles of agreement, I was, and this is something that the lawyer will have to weigh in on, or maybe it says it in the articles for future amendments. I'm assuming it would be like the budget, it would be a commingled vote and not a town-by-town vote.
Yeah,
To create.
that's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah.
But just if you get that verified.
Both of these petitions are currently under legal scrutiny.
Yes.
Yeah. Legal review, yeah. And so, yeah, we'll get an opinion from the attorney. Just from what Peter said, that's the same. I've talked to people at the Agency of Education about it, their attorney, who said, you really need to talk to your attorney. However, they were in agreement on that. And that legal opinion will be a public document for anybody to see. So that's for next week. Anybody else have anything that they want to bring up?
As a reminder, it's Tuesday, not Monday.
Oh yeah, it'll be Tuesday at the high school. And then next month we are where? Anybody know? Anybody?
I'm not.
Cornwall.
Thank you.
Excellent. Back to Cornwall.
this month.
So,
Yeah, any update on the form, anything that should,
on the what?
in the form?
Oh, anything, we're still on for the 27th. Yeah. Yeah.
The forum's time is what, just in case people don't know?
6 to 8.
At the high school auditorium.
Yep. Yeah, we sent something out last week.
Jen, I'll talk with you afterward about coordinating a front porch forum.
Thank you.
There'll be a quiz on the 375-page report, too.
Well, I made it to the first 100 pages.
I'm like the mode on my computer, it's so big.
I got it on my phone.
Oh, yeah. Actually,
An executive summary might be good.
Yeah.
Can't even find that. It's like all this white spinning every time I try to look at it.
So, just to, this was a hard presentation. We've obviously we've got more challenging conversations coming up, but I just want to sort of reiterate what we did talk about. And while a lot of this higher level policy, money stuff continues to get talked about, bottom line is we are still running a very, very good school system. That's not going to change no matter the outcome of any of our conversations. And I just think that we always need to keep that in the sort of the foundation of why we come here, despite the difficulty of everything else that's going on. For a reality that, we didn't create, that nobody's responsible for, it's just happening. Anyway, on that note, thank you all for making the drive out to Bridgeport. I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Stand adjourned.
and